This episode of Rookie Hunter is brought to you by the Wild Sheep Foundation. Adventures in sheep country can change your life. And as residents of BC, we're very fortunate to have 3 different species of sheep in our province. After attending the Wild Sheep Foundation's annual convention, Sheep Show, in Reno, Nevada, we got to see what conservation looks like firsthand. The Wild Sheep Foundation's ability to raise and put millions of dollars on the ground each year to keep these majestic animals on the mountaintops worldwide is unmatched. The Wild Sheep family is a diverse group of people from all walks of life, and membership is open to anyone. Whether you're a seasoned pro, it's your first time on the mountain, or you just like to see sheep on the hillside, you can sign up and join today. Kelly and I are lifetime members, but you can become an annual member for just $45. You can also become a member of the Less Than One Club, which is the only club you want to get kicked out of. If you've never taken a North American or international ram, you can join us in the Less Than One Club for an extra $25. Plus, Less Than One Club membership also includes entry into a draw for 3 separate Dall sheep hunts, which will be given away at Sheep Show in 2019. For more information on the Wild Sheep Foundation and to become a member, head over to wildsheepfoundation.org. Hey guys, welcome to episode 66, Rookie Hunter. Today on the show, we're extremely excited to have Mark Hall in the studio with us. Mark holds a master's degree in environmental science. He's a professional agrologist and a retired professional forester. Above that, he's extremely passionate about conservation, wildlife, and hunting, and that's going to ring true as you hear him speak in this podcast. We get pretty deep in this episode. I really enjoyed it. I know Kelly also enjoyed it. And I hope you guys enjoy this one too. Mark's website, hunterconservationist.ca. There's a ton of in-depth material on there that I think you should find some time to set aside and read. We love to hear from you, so send your emails to info@therookihunter.com. You can send us questions, you can send us show ideas, give us feedback on what you think of the show. We love to hear all that stuff. Again, send it to info@therookihunter.com. It's hot as hell outside, so sit back, relax, crack a cold beer, and enjoy episode 66 with Mark Hall. Mark, welcome. Thanks for making the trip to Kelowna.
Yeah, thanks.
Appreciate you coming out.
Yeah, you bet.
So you got some plans to kind of hang out for the weekend? And
you bet. Visit with some friends here.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, and decided to go up another 6 or 8 degrees in temperature.
Yeah, no kidding.
Who needs to hear? So
yeah, it's hard to get away from it too here.
Oh man,
with the lakes right there, so you can always hop in,
go down and cool off. Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, good. Cool. So let's jump into the things here. Just give us a quick introduction of who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so my name's Mark Hall. I live in the East Kootenays in a little community between Cranbrook and Fernie called Jaffrey. And I write for a blog, for myself, and write about, mostly conservation and wildlife management issues and stuff. And it's near and dear to my heart. I've been, I think in my family, like my dad's side of the family, I'm 3rd generation hunter.
Okay, cool.
So I've grown up with it my whole life. My grandfathers and uncles and my father and stuff were hunters and trappers. And for my family, going back, into those days, hunting was about augmenting food for the family.
Right.
So my dad came from a family of 8. My grandfather was the only one that worked, and, raising kids from the 30s and 40s and stuff.
Right.
Hunting was about food.
Right.
Trapping was about extra income, right? So I very much grew up with, like, that's the purpose of hunting.
Yeah.
And, but it's kind of funny. I did a talk to a group of non-hunters earlier this spring, and part of my talk is kind of talking about this background growing up, in a multi-generational hunting family. But I was at a very young age. I think the family talked about me I was going to be the first hall boy that wasn't going to be a hunter.
Oh, interesting.
Because wildlife and nature became very much the core of what my existence was at about at a very young age. And, and I developed a really strong sense of empathy for wildlife and anything living, really. I mean, even to this day, I still pick a bug up and take it outside and let it go. And as a kid, it'd be like, a bird hits window and, you look after it till it's ready to fly away. And, I remember seeing things where, like a little tree gets sprouted in the crack in the concrete or whatever, and it's not. And I mean, I'm out there with like chisels and hammers and stuff, like chipping the concrete and dig this little tree out and, plant it and stuff. And so I think, even for me, it was, I wasn't really sure if I was ever going to be able to, to actually be a hunter, just, because of that strong sense of empathy for wildlife. But I think I grew up in a family with the right values and respecting, wildlife and not, diminishing or thinking about, like the death of an animal and hunting, in the wrong way. And so, I slowly kind of grew into it and made the choice as a kid to, I'm going to get into this because I'm getting into it for the right reasons. Right. I think that's important, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And that was a time where, social media, the pressure, kind of all the, me first and, and the bragging and all that kind of stuff didn't really exist around hunting. It was very much just, if you knew about hunting, you just kind of knew about what was going on in your family. Right. And not really what the rest of the world was doing. Yeah. So you tended to grow up and be influenced, by your family's values towards hunting. Right. And that's where, that's where I came from, so it's, eventually kind of got into the hunting. And,
do you remember harvesting your first animal or?
Yeah, I mean, my first animals, as a very young kid was, grouse. Yeah. So I used to go hunting with my dad. We lived in northern BC, and so we were just typically hunting moose. Right. And so then I was kind of always along for the ride, and I would get grouse when we'd, you'd see them here and there. So that was kind of the first animal, and then kind of my first, big game animal was a white-tailed deer, over in the Kootenays.
Yeah. How old were you at that point?
I was like 17, and I started hunting. I bought my first rifle after a summer job, and started hunting the fall. I think I turned 13.
Oh, okay.
So that's kind of how long it actually took me to get my first animal, right? And I think...
Were you actively pursuing it, or were you sort of not too sure about it at that point?
No, I was. Yeah, I was just totally into it. But by that time, I was, at that age, I was like hook, line, and sinker, into hunting. As a teenager, it was just sort of like everything was about the outdoors. Right. If there were magazines under my bed, they were hunting magazines. Right. They were like, it was just like none of that other stuff interested me, right? It was just like, Peterson's hunting magazines. I had thousands of those things, right? Just in boxes and reread them. And so by that time I was, it was my thing, right? And I'd been out with my dad like in my early teens as a youngster and stuff. And, we got moose, but I wasn't able to hit it. It was like I tried, and then it was like it was, afterwards or whatever, my dad would skin it all out and find the bullet or whatever, and he'd be like, find out that it came from his casing and not mine or whatever, right? And so I was like, oh, okay, well, so it wasn't until I was about 17 and on my own when I got my first deer and stuff. So
very cool.
Yeah.
Cool. You've obviously been, you've just made that clear, observing wildlife for a long time now. what are some of the big things you've noticed as far as trends or things over the years since you first started, either positive or negative?
Yeah, it's there's two components to this, which I think I'll touch on. I think the first part of it, I might as well just jump into. There's this really interesting concept where people reflect on something over their life, but they measure today's experience by a benchmark.
Gotcha.
And at some point earlier in their life, right? And that's where you tend to measure things back. So as you get older, like in your 50s or 60s or whatever, if you're measuring back to a time where your benchmark is like of, more abundance, and it's like, you got a moose every year, or whatever, and now, you've gone 5 years and you can't get a moose, then your perspective of what's going on out there, in nature with wildlife populations is very different than if your benchmark is something that's very, very different, right?
Yeah, for sure. Because that's
like ours.
Yeah, we've noticed trends in that 5 years, and it's interesting to watch, but we don't have anything to compare that to. So we might be, observing just a natural cycle if it's mule deer populations or whatever it might be. So
and over time you will, you develop this, kind of where you become in tune, with the rhythms of nature and stuff, and so you will start to actually see cycles,
right?
And just and subtle little things, and that becomes, pretty cool,
right?
To kind of know that you're sort of in touch with hey, it's a little different than last year, and I can kind of see a little bit of a trend, and it might be something that's more subtle to a small geographic area that the big wildlife surveys and stuff are not going to pick up on that.
Yeah,
and so there's that part of my perspective that I'm very cognizant of, that concept of benchmarking, right? And I try not to, when I'm looking at things purely from a conservation and management perspective, I try not to have my personal experience in life kind of influence my perspective of like, well, there was way more, this when I was a kid or whatever, and because the snow was deeper and, all that sort of stuff as well. Like I'm aware that I can be biased that way.
Yeah.
So I'm thankful at this stage in my life for things that I see and I can still do in this province because of the abundance. And I do regularly sort of thank what we have. But when I follow, what's going on in science and conservation, there's definitely things going on. Right. There's populations of animals in the province that are declining. The big situation with the moose in the central interior. At home, in the Kootenays, our elk population is half of what it was 10 years ago. Our moose population in some areas is half of what it was 10, 12 years ago. There's a bighorn sheep herd near where I live in the Bull River that, 40+% of the herd disappeared in a 12-month period.
Wow.
Like just, they're gone, so that's real. That stuff is real and it's happening. But I look at a few things like I grew up in my teens in Houston and Smithers and, the north. So we mostly were hunting moose.
Right.
And there were a few deer around. Like I was always by a mule deer tag, but hunting all fall long. I think the only 2 times I ever saw a buck, growing up in Smithers when I was a kid, was like the day after, the weekend after hunting season. It's like, oh, there's a mule deer buck. And it's like, you're a kid, hunting all year, and it was like, you can't even find a deer. Where now, like in the north, it's like their mule deer populations up there, better than they are, in Region 8 and Region 4. and there's whitetails have moved up there,
Right.
Now and stuff, and that's completely different. So if I were still living up there, I think I would be open enough to say, like, this is an increase, over my benchmark. I remember as a kid where it was like, I couldn't see a buck during hunting season, and now I have guys around me that are harvesting, buck mule deer in the same area. So yeah, it's a mix of both.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has been kind of fun. Like I said, even though it's been a short period for us. But when you do see a change, to try and figure out what might be influencing that change. And there's so many variables, but it does kind of open up your mind a little bit to think about these things a little bit more, and what our impact might be, what the fire impacts are, all those different things, stuff you wouldn't normally think about if you weren't hunting. You're just sort of out there, and if you see a deer, that's cool.
Yeah.
But when you're hunting and you're actively looking for them, and 1 year they're all over the place, and 1 year they're nowhere to be seen.
They're not there.
It
Yeah.
makes you start thinking about everything, which I think is a healthy thing to be considering for anybody. If you're hunting or not, it doesn't really matter. That's some of the stuff that people miss if you're not spending a lot of time out there.
Well, we also, when you hang out there and you participate in it, you start realizing all the apparent relationships that are happening.
Right.
So I think it helps you to not jump to conclusions. Like we've started, you see just how much is involved. And it kind of is humbling because, whether it's your benchmark or you think it's the fires or whether you think it's, people or industry, and it's a big network of all of it put together. So it's very hard to weed it all out. And I think like we've read a lot of your articles, and you come from a science background, right?
Yeah.
So you're a ecologist?
Yeah, I have a background, bachelor's degree in forestry, which I used kind of early in my career to get into more wildlife habitat management stuff.
Yep.
And then later on, I did a master's degree in environment, and kind of broaden my work a little bit. So, yeah, I've been kind of involved in, wildlife habitat, ecology, conservation, reclamation, type stuff for most of my career. So that's definitely kind of where the science-y kind of part of that creeps into my writing, right? Is that's just part of who I am, right? Sort of the objective look at things. And
yeah. It seems like that's what we need.
A bit of it. I mean, you can overload people with being, kind of too sort of, data or objective,
right.
Kind of science-based. So I do try to, kind of balance that a little bit with, sort of, personal perspectives or, sort of digging into, myths or aspects of tribalism that exist. I do dig a bit of that into that in my writing as well, because that comes into play as well. But yeah, I'm definitely kind of tend to write kind of more from the science side of things.
Right.
So,
you mentioned just briefly that you were doing a talk with a group of non-hunters. Do you find that to be a challenge when somebody who's a non-hunter knows that you hunt when you're giving a talk? Do they hold that as a strike against you and think that maybe you're coming at it from the wrong angle, perhaps? Because
so far I haven't encountered anything like that.
Yeah.
And I think that's the great part about when you actually talk to people,
right.
and you can look into their eyes, as opposed to trying to do this stuff as a blog
media.
article or social media, because that's a whole different beast, right?
Cool.
It's just sort of like, nope, I don't know you, and you are evil, and fire back. But now all of a sudden, when it's humans, right, and you can sort of open up and be vulnerable to like who you are as a person and what you believe in and those sorts of things, people respect that. And and the talks, the last one that I did, it was, they were non-hunters, but and I just basically came out and said, like, my purpose here is I just want you to understand who I am as a person. I am a hunter, but I'm going to tell you a story about me and my life and my relationship to wildlife. And I just want you to understand me. I'm not speaking for all of the other hunters because they have their own story.
Yeah.
They are their own person. So I'm just going to say, this is just who I am.
Yeah.
And I'm going to kind of open up here. My intent is I don't want to change your mind or beliefs about hunting.
Right.
But at the end of this, I just want you to go, hey, I understand who that person is. He's a hunter. I understand where he comes from, what he believes, and why he believes what he believes. And I can respect him as a person. Still don't agree with hunting. Still not going to do it. And that's fine because it's not my objective to change people's minds. It's just to say, hey, this is just who I am as a person. And it's super successful. Like I've just told my life story and it resonates with people. And I've never had anybody, sort of, say, oh, that's just a bunch of whatever and you're still just a murderer, or whatever. I've never had that happen. So
well, that's great. That's kind of the answer I was hoping for because, we've through the show tried to tell guys, through a long form conversation like what you're doing, you can really make an impact on somebody and they can make an impact on you. But doing it through social media is the worst way to do it.
It's
because, you can't, for one, you can't look at the person. You don't know what their tone is in the text that they're sending you. And things tend to get heated pretty quickly. And it's not good for either side of the conversation. It's a throwaway, basically.
Yeah. No, totally. It's, what is it? The one I've heard about social media is there's nothing social about it.
It's pretty much true. Yeah.
Right. I think that's one of the reasons that podcasts are becoming so popular is because,
totally.
It's not, maybe you aren't looking that person in the eye, but there's definitely like, you feel like you're in the room having a beer with those people. Right. So,
totally. Totally.
Yep.
Yeah. And as long as it's not the type of podcast, where you're kind of sitting around high-fiving about, things or whatever, and people are like, whoa, is that all you guys? Think about most of the, the leading podcasts that are out there right now are not those types of discussions, right? Like they're
Meat Eater, Steve Vernella, and he's it's great when they're trying to bring that knowledge out and educate people about, he's got lots of biologists and that kind of thing on the show, and I think that's something that we like to get more into as well. To bring people in from all different walks of life, non-hunters, hunters, scientists.
It's about a journey of learning and exploration and stuff, and that's been a big part of hunting, for me, and that's why I've never, ever used the benchmark of like, did you have a successful season or was your hunt successful, right? And always being measured by, did you, get an animal where you could cancel your tag? Because for me, hunting was always about two things. And it was about being in nature and being able to observe wildlife and nature doing what it was intended to do, just kind of naturally. Like I love putting myself in situations where you can just watch something unfold and just go, that was the coolest thing ever. And you walk off the mountain, right? And so that's very important to me. And the other important part of hunting for me as a journey is to learn. Like I'm only going to be here, for a very short period of time on this planet, and one of my life goals is to try to use that time to understand how nature works as much as possible, and I think this is where some people don't quite get that as a hunter, and it's like, so why do you actually have to hunt or kill the animal in order to do that? And part of what I've found is there's things that I've learned about nature and wildlife behavior and how they interact with their environment that I would never ever know unless I was coming at it from the perspective of being a predator. Right? That's it.
100%.
The mindset's different. The places that you put yourself and what you have to do, whether you get the animal or not. I've just seen and learned things where I'm just like, I had no idea. That is just so cool.
Yeah.
And
And it's hard to explain that to somebody. It's something they just really have to experience. And some people don't want to, try that experience, but
yeah,
there's
totally.
so much you can learn from it.
Yeah.
And that's the only way you can do it, I think.
Yeah. And so, I mean, that's where I think, the face-to-face with people, even if it's just like a conversation in a coffee shop or whether you actually kind of make like a presentation to a group of people is those nuances about those things can come out more. You can explore that. Like part of my talk is I talk about a period of my life where I had to quit hunting. And because I was severely affected by the birth of both my children.
Wow.
That went like seriously like wrong, like ended up in emergency situations. And, the second time with my daughter, it was so serious, like I wasn't allowed in the operating room.
Wow.
And I literally did the dad thing where I sat alone in a waiting room for 2 hours, not knowing if my wife or my daughter were alive.
Cow.
And I got hit with a thing, like shortly after that, where I realized that I'd developed this hypersensitivity to life and death. Like, so whether I was watching a news story or whatever, and I had to back away from hunting.
Wow.
I was that, that happened to me. It wasn't my choice. It was just, it's part of my story.
Yeah.
But as my kids grew up and stuff, and we lived in a rural area and started taking them out and we just kind of naturally evolved, taking the kids back out and hunting and stuff and everything, kind of like, I transitioned back into it. But when you tell people that story, like, I mean, it hits people like at an emotional level, right?
Yeah,
and it's true. I'm not making it up for the effect. And even if you are completely against hunting, you can see like, hey, here's a hunter who actually really thinks deeply about life and death and what he's doing and that sort of thing, and it completely changes the tone.
Right.
Do you think as time went on, do you think hunting helped with that life and death, or even the hunting you did before? Like, do you?
I believe it was actually it was a valuable experience for me to be put through that, because it allowed me as I got older to have a very different perspective on the death part of hunting, and to really, really seriously dig into myself to understand what that meant, and completely changed some of the the fundamental beliefs I have. It changed some of my rituals, and I think it's put me in a place where, like, spiritually, I have a very different perspective when I do harvest an animal now, and it was because of that. So I didn't go through a transition where I'm like, oh, okay, I got over that, that issue. I was able to kind of embrace it and then put it into a more meaningful, thankful kind of reverence, type thing when I am hunting, and I think that's good. It's healthy place to be as a hunter, to evolve into that more thankful thing. And I think that type of stuff is what a lot of the non-hunting public is looking for from us as hunters.
For sure.
Because they're seeing the stuff like, on the social media stuff, and, the hunter with a giraffe and all that kind of stuff, and guys high-fiving or whatever. And they're going, oh, this is what this means to them. And I think for the most part, the vast majority of non-hunters are kind of looking into our world to sort of answer some questions. Who are these people? Why do they do this? Are they human? Do they feel sad afterwards? Do they have appropriate emotions and stuff. Of course, there's the ones that are on the far end of the spectrum. It's just like, don't care, don't want to hear it. This is just morally wrong.
Yeah.
Whatever the reason is, whatever you believe, sorry, it needs to stop. And I think that's kind of like 5%.
Right.
And then, of course, the 5% that are just interested in, the ego part of, taking a life's animal is just a small percentage of the hunting community. And there's this big bell curve of where 90% of the people, hunters and non-hunters, fall in the middle. And I think the vast majority of the non-hunting public is really looking at us for those types of human qualities, and which is why I tell that story, because it makes people go, yeah, that's real, and then they can appreciate, hunters a little bit more for being empathetic people. So,
yeah, definitely. With social media, you look at somebody's profile, if it's Instagram or whatever it might be, and they'll call themselves a conservationist. So I'm curious what your thoughts are and how you can actually wear that badge.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a term that you have a bit of latitude to define for yourself.
Yeah.
There's the aspect of what you do for, let's say, wildlife outside of your time hunting. So do you contribute financially to causes? Do you support organizations, like the membership because they're off advocating for things? Or, are you actively getting involved in, citizen science or, a weekend, habitat project, or something like that. So there's that aspect of it. I'm a conservationist because I get involved in these other non-hunting things that benefit, all types of wildlife. So, and I think that's fair.
Yeah.
You get to call yourself a conservationist if you are doing those things, or any one of them. I mean, just simply if you're a hunter and you just pay a $50 membership to belong to an organization that just does something, that $50 in my mind, if that's all you do, that confers you as a conservationist, right? Because the person that's using and not giving back, it's kind of like, okay, at least just pay $50 membership. That's helping.
Yeah.
And then I think there's the other aspect of a conservationist, which can kind of fall back to the true definition of conservation, which is like the wise use of limited resources, right? And so personally, for me, one of my aspects of conservation that how I define it is how I actually behave in what I do when I'm in the outdoors, right? And it's like I make conscious choices sometimes not to do things just because it feels like as one individual, I'm taking too much. Or, it's sort of like, hey, I'm legally allowed to buy 2 deer tags and get 2 deer. So, this happened to me last winter, and I got the first deer in the archery season in December, and then I'm just like, I was entitled to get another deer, and I'm just like, no, I think that's good.
Yeah.
It's like, it's just my wife and I at home. This is enough.
Yeah.
And so it's that self-restraint, and that can be sort of, self-restraint on what you physically kind of take, take from nature. It can be anything, and I think everybody does this where, you're picking up garbage when you're out there, you're doing, whatever those things. And it's more kind of the, I guess the inside meaning,
right?
To your relationship out there. And that I think is part of conservation as well.
Right.
And if that's what you do, then yeah, I think that's you're entitled to say, yeah, I'm a conservationist because, I'm not maxing everything out, right?
Yeah,
like that's
sure.
like a user, like a high consumptive. The speed limit says 100 kilometers an hour. I'm legally allowed to go 100, even though there's like, lots of traffic or whatever,
Yeah.
and you just go to the max.
Yeah.
You know,
We
so-
have the LEH Moose Tag this year. And you can take 2 because we have 4
Yep.
guys, but that was kind of,
It was one of the first things we talked about. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, I don't think we're going to need 2 moose.
That-
We'll see what happens, like when we're in the moment and like,
Yep.
well, let's look at the first moose and let's see how much meat everyone has and we'll make a conscious decision about it. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it seems a little excessive right off the hop.
Yeah, I mean, it can be excessive in the sense of you're like, wow, this is a lot of meat. And I've been in a situation twice with my son, and I think it's the only 2 times it's ever happened in my entire life. One morning, opening morning of turkey season at home one year, like within 2 hours of the season, I gobbled in 2 toms into our turkey set, and we both got a bird.
Right.
Right. And then a number of years later, my son and I drew a group hunt for moose, and we actually got 2 bulls pretty much right together the first morning.
Wow.
It was a lot of meat, but grandparents and stuff were there, and we spread it around, and then actually like that moose meat in our freezer, I think lasted us almost 10 years.
Wow.
Wow.
Holy cow. I didn't know that was.
And yes, I mean that's a whole other topic about how long meat can last in a freezer, and if it's looked after properly, it can last a long time. But so there's that part of it. But both times at the end of it, I actually was sort of like, I felt like too much.
Right.
I'm like, I should have just let my son just take 1 tom, and the other one, like run away or whatever.
Yeah.
So there was a little bit of, so I'm just sort of saying, be prepared for that part. Like maybe talk about it a little bit ahead of time, so that you've had because when there's all of a sudden it's like there's 2 bulls standing there side by side, and you're going to be like, oh my god, but if you haven't thought about that or talked about that amongst yourself of like, how are you going to feel? Like think that through ahead of time so that you kind of know, what the right feeling is. And it's different when, if there would have been like 6 toms strutted in first thing and you got 2, you're kind of like, okay, that's like, 4 ran off and they're going to grow up and become more mature birds or, or do whatever, turkeys do. But when it's like 2 and then 2 are removed, there's 0. But there's not 0, like there's more out there, but just your feeling of the world is just like, there was 2 bull moose and 1 cow, and it's like we got both the bulls at the same time, and it was all of a sudden it was just kind of like, it was a little different feeling, right?
Yeah.
And kind of like, hey, probably could have done okay with just 1. So
Yeah. Well, and in our last couple episodes, we've been talking about this moose hunt and kind of what we want it to be. And there's a lot of road density in this specific area.
Okay.
So, and I think, Mike has talked about making it, as much of a backpack hunt as we can. But through our experience in hunting, I think he nailed it with the, how are you going to feel afterwards, right? And you want to, I think that's what we're kind of getting into now is we're thinking ahead past the harvest.
Yep.
And really trying to, we want it to be something that 10 years down the road, we feel great about still, right? And we don't want it to be like a, hop out of the truck, blast something in the road and we're done kind of thing. And I mean, there's a time and a place for everything, but I think what we are looking for, it's kind of
it's
how
something that
feel.
makes an impact on you, and it's a story that you can look back on and something that you can share with people as well.
Yep, totally.
Rather than just a hunt that took place and you don't really say too much about it afterwards because you didn't feel, the way you wanted it to.
Yeah.
So I guess that's the benefit of hunting for a while now and experiencing different things. You start to realize, and I think this will change throughout our lives too, but realize, think about what you want from the hunt. And it's not always just the meat. there's so much more to it than that. In some cases, I'm happier to come back with no meat and a great experience than, meat without the experience.
Yeah,
so
Yeah.
Yeah.
you only get so many hunts, right? Who knows how long we're going to be around for. So,
Yeah.
there's only so many opportunities for us to do these backpack style hunts. So there might only be 30 of these hunts left in our life before we can't do that type of thing anymore. So you really want each one to count and be something special.
Oh, totally.
It won't always be, but you want it to try and make it that way.
Totally. And I think that bigger feeling that you take away from a hunt and the experience and how you approached it. I mean, I honestly believe that is an integral part of conservation, and being a conservationist is that whole philosophical approach you take to doing it. And the reason I believe that is because what we talked about earlier, where as you spend more time in the outdoors, and especially when you kind of stay married to kind of a particular region to hunt, like a area, regardless of whether game's there or not, you will just faithfully kind of stick to that area.
Yep.
Year after year after year, you will start to learn these rhythms and stuff, and that's a value of hunters, which I honestly believe, like, unless you're a scientist, there is nobody else out there on the land that's that in tune to some of the subtleties of what's going on than what, hunters pick up on. And combine that with your philosophy and approach to a hunt of, whether it felt right, was it, too much? Was I in and out and had a minimal impact on that?
Yeah.
And when you combine those two things, your sense of what's going on with that kind of approach to what you're taking from the natural world, and you're able to then put that together and bring that to a table or something, and collectively, if all hunters do that, that's how we actually steer management,
Right.
because they're getting this feedback that that's from personal observations to kind of like what people are actually feeling on the ground, whether a particular season is like too long, too much, year, it should be, like whatever. And I think that's an important intangible part of conservation that hunters bring to the table, as long as they come forward with that stuff, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, for sure. One thing I guess we should talk about, and we've touched on this on a number of episodes, we've got people all over North America listening to this, but we can talk about things from a BC perspective for a while. And it's, some people will say in BC, I'm a conservationist because I buy my license tags and species tags and everything each year. So I'm putting money back into conservation. We were under the influence of that's how it worked too when we first started hunting. And as you do more research, you find out where the funds go, and a majority of it does not go back in there.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you don't mind going into how it works in BC and maybe pull some examples of what they're doing in the States and what's working well and what isn't.
Yeah. Just before the show, we were kind of talking a little bit about that, and I've touched on it a little bit in my writing, but I think that's part of the misconception that hunters in BC and Canada have, is that what we see happening south of the border in the U.S. Applies to us up here. Hunters pay for conservation, all these types of things, and I've been trying to educate people, especially in the hunting community, that's not exactly the same scenario here in British Columbia or Canada, and we have to be very, very careful, about that being our platform. So, for example, here in British Columbia, I think the wildlife budget was currently kind of running on like about $35 million a year, right? Hunting tags and licenses generates, the 13, 14 million something a year, of which 2.5% a year of that goes into the Habitat Conservation Trust Foundation, which directly goes back to conservation. So, $2.5 to $3 million of 14 million is directly going back to conservation. Right. The rest of it is going into general revenue. And if some of that even comes back for the wildlife budget, I mean, there's a deficit. So the taxpayers of the province, in a way, are making up the difference between what it costs to manage, wildlife. And not all wildlife management is strictly for the purpose of hunting. I mean, they're managing, a broad spectrum of species out there. But the difference down in the States is just the sheer magnitude of, one, the numbers of hunters. So you get, some states, like where, they're talking like hundreds of millions of dollars just from tags and licenses, like in, the state of Texas or wherever, like, they got millions of hunters. I mean, they're footing the bill. I mean, that money's coming back and paying for, the state wildlife agencies, like, I mean, literally paying for biologists, like their salaries and the programs.
Yeah. And this is the excise taxes?
Well, that's just straight.
Separate,
That's just straight. The money paid, by tags and licensing. Now in the U.S., they have the two funds, the Pittman Roberts and Dingle Johnson. So one's on firearms and ammunition, and the other is on mostly angling related gear, tackle, and marine boat fuel and boat taxes and stuff. Well, those two taxes, so they're federal excise taxes. So it's money that's collected by the federal government in the U.S. that go into special accounts. And then on an annual basis, that money is apportioned back to the states, proportional to the money that was collected from the state. It's generally money that the state has to apply for after they've paid for projects. And then they apply and they get, the money back. So the state still has to like front, a fisheries project or a wildlife project. But those two funds in the U.S. are generating, depending on the year, between $750 million of $1 billion and $1 billion annually.
Wow.
Like from, fishing and hunting and outdoor stuff. And that's big. I mean, that's really big. And we don't have that in British Columbia. We don't have that in Canada. We don't have an excise tax on either of those two things, right?
And I feel like most people would be okay with that. Most people we talk to would be,
I agree.
Hunting equipment, outdoor equipment in general. It's not a huge tax that you notice necessarily.
No, it's not. And in fact, the way the ones work in the States is the consumer doesn't pay the tax.
Okay.
The manufacturer pays it. And that's why it's an excise tax.
Oh yeah, I guess that makes sense.
They can't pass it on. So like literally, the checks are written to the federal government by the manufacturers. So a firearm or a ammunition manufacturer will, just like doing your tax return every year, they will write a check for hundreds of millions of dollars that they'll sign over to the, the federal government in the U.S.
Wow. Do you think that's something that we'll see here one day?
I mean, it's been talked about for lots of years by hunters and MPs at, different levels. Canadian Wildlife Federation has, tried to advance it in Ottawa like multiple times, but it's struggled in the Canadian federal government system from a philosophical basis. There's like some fundamental philosophies in Canadian federal government that just kind of inherently has a problem, like with manufacturers paying for sort of government administered programs. We do have some similar taxes to like that in automobiles, and like there's some similar things, but there is a bit of an impediment in the roots of governing in Canada versus the U.S.
Right.
That is kind of where the hurdle is, to move that forward.
Yeah.
So
It's too bad because it just seems like such a missed opportunity. And when you think of British Columbia and the image we have to people outside of Canada or internationally, they picture the wildlife that we have, and it if it's a killer whale or it's a grizzly bear, that's sort of the image people have when they think of British Columbia, and these things are all starting to slowly, diminish over time.
Yeah.
So I think it's unfortunate that we don't put the money in there, but I think that most people would like to see it go in there. It's just a matter of making that work somehow.
Yep, completely. So. And I agree. That's my experience has been the same way. Like even if you talk to, wildlife photographers or whoever, they're on board. It's just like, I mean, if it comes off my camera equipment or,
exactly.
or whatever, it's like, I'm happy to pay into it. Right. So if there's a willingness of the consumer to pay, it should be.
Yeah, why not?
It should be a fairly easy for the powers to be to sort of say, oh, well, if you're in favor of a tax, then we'll implement it, as opposed to we're going to up your taxes, and then everybody's like, no.
Yeah, of course.
So I think we have, from a wildlife conservation perspective, we have a wide support across hunting and non-hunting basis to contribute to it, and I see a lot in BC. Like, I mean, that agenda is being moved forward, in a lot of places, right? So, even like the Grizzly Bear Viewing Association is taking, an initiative upon itself and is looking at, and from what I understand, actively engaged with government in funding models. Like, how is this industry can contribute to conservation, right?
That's
so
good to hear,
so there's people there that recognize that that they need to be paying as well, but they need to have things like the whale watching industry and stuff, where I haven't quite seen sort of the same leadership there going. We have a problem with the southern resident killer whale population. We're making all this money off of it. It's like, hey, I'm putting on my hand. You should be taxing us X amount per customer, every day, so this can go back into whale research or whale conservation. So,
yeah, it just feels like anybody who's benefiting from the outdoors, be it in a physical sense or, making money from it, you think you would want to put something back into it. But I guess some people just don't have that same perspective, unfortunately. But hopefully we get there.
And I mean, there's always the choice. Like, there's nothing limiting to say that you can make personal donations to organizations that are doing work, purchasing land, or for conservation, or whatever. But I think what tends to happen in philanthropy type models is it's a very tiny percentage of people that are very wealthy that are putting in a disproportionately large amount of the funds, where if you took, everybody paid $10 versus this one millionaire that wrote a check for, $1 million, because population is always growing, and you could potentially generate, 10 times the money by having, 5 million people donate $10 a year, or be taxed $10 a year, as opposed to relying on a couple of philanthropists to come through at tax time. And the different part about that is when you actually know you're paying into conservation, it gives you the feeling of ownership.
Totally.
I mean, it is a public resource out there to start out with, and it's one of the things that we struggle with in the province, is getting people to step up and say, this is ours, and we don't like this, or we want to see this change or get better. The more people in society, just beyond hunters, that are saying this belongs to us, and they want to voice their opinions when things aren't meeting the public's expectations as far as managing a public resource. That sometimes it takes a little bit of being financially invested in that to evoke that feeling in the masses, and that's why I think like the the broader conservation funding models where everybody's kind of knowingly putting a little bit into the pie gets a larger base of people in society that will make noise when something's not going right for conservation.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I'd say $10 a year is pretty good considering the backyard we have to play in. It's a pretty small feed.
Totally.
Yeah,
totally.
Well, this conversation kind of aligns with the province with their wildlife and habitat engagement. I think the deadline's the 31st of this month, so I don't know if this will come out before then. And Mark, we would reference folks to your Hunter Conservationist website to check out the article that you wrote, which is somewhat of a proposal to that engagement, right?
It was. Yeah, I submitted a proposal which kind of focused in on habitat management, specifically on that part of the engagement process, and kind of, I guess, proposed or outlined a number of, I think there was 12 sort of key components of improving wildlife habitat management in the province going forward. So, but there is opportunities to make comments on everything from, how wildlife conservation is funded to, how people are consulted on it, and, how information is shared, with the public. So it's one of those public processes where you don't necessarily have to answer, everything. And I just chose to zero in on the one thing. But
yeah, I know it's a great article. One thing that jumped out at me was, that economics, how we look at economics and how it fits in with the capacity or sustainability of the environment.
Oh, right.
So, kind of, are we economically, running the wildlife and the habitat out of the province, or are we working within it?
Right. That's the sort of two of the big economic models that exist out there in economics in the world, sort of being the traditional economic model and the ecological economic model. So, the traditional economic model, which British Columbia runs on and pretty much the entire world, is the economy should grow. And the model countries assume that their economies should grow continuously. Like there's nothing limiting how much your economy can grow. But in making choices as a nation or a province or a state in how you want to grow your economy, there's all these different things that you have to take into consideration and balance, right? And protecting the environment is one consideration of making large-scale economic, decisions on how you want to grow your economy as a state. And what that model assumes is that, the environment or the biosphere that actually supports life on Earth is unlimited. So if we want to grow our economy, we can grow it unlimited because we'll never be short of metals, we'll never be short of, raw materials. We can but the reality is that's, the world is finite.
right.
And so the economic or the ecological economic model is a different economic philosophy that says our economies need to take into consideration that they are actually constrained by what the natural world can provide. And so we have to set up economies that are commensurate with the ability of nature to renew itself for renewable resources and to assimilate the pollution that's created with economic growth, right? It's about finding that balance. It doesn't mean that economies can't grow or that companies can't earn more, but it's recognizing that just straight outward growth that relies on consumption and drawing from nature is limited.
Right.
And I kind of talked about. I mean, that's a pretty high level goal to to pitch, right? Going,
it is.
Hey, one of the things we should do for conservation is we should change the entire economic model how the province runs, right? And they're like, okay, we'll get right on that, right? Like, so I think I wrote that, put that as one of the points in my submission, but it drives more at the heart of the sustainability conversations that are happening out there in the province that's bringing a little bit more of a highlight to this issue of regionally and locally making decisions based on how much development can the landscape hold,
Right.
in the name of human economic growth. So that's
I thought it was a good way to kind of simplify a very complex
totally.
topic. Like for us to read it, it was like, oh, okay, this is it's an idea, and it's something to talk about.
Yeah,
and I also like the intergenerational line in there, right? Because it's spanning, like, we're not doing this just for our generation, it's for the next generation, right? So
and so that was one of the bullet points about where we need to get to with even just like broader with wildlife management in the province, or even bigger biodiversity conservation, is we have this approach in the province of roundtables, stakeholder groups, this sort of, outside government, that these representatives from different interests help in the decision-making process. In my experience, the sort of the flaw I see in that model is a stakeholder process means that the people that are there to help make the decision have a stake in the outcome, meaning they have a stake financially in the outcome, some way or shape, right? And so that means that you're always making decisions about things to do with the environment, conservation, wildlife, fish. Like, in the long term, you're always making it about what are the needs of the generation and for-profit businesses right here, right now, in the short term. And where I think we need to get to in the province in those types of things are roundtables and advisory groups that are not representing, the people at the table are not representing a sector, an interest, or whatever. They're people that have been put forward into an advisory committee or a roundtable to represent the interests of future British Columbians.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So what if we make decision X today, what's going to be available in 50 years or 100 years to those next generations, and get ourselves moving towards a more sustainable model in natural resource management, wildlife conservation, and habitat management, where we start to make more of these decisions to go, we're doing this today for 100 years from now.
Yeah.
We'll never, none of us will ever be here to see those gains. And I do think that's a big part that's missing in conservation.
I would agree.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
It's a great article you put forward there. So
Yeah. Some pretty lofty, a few of the bullet points like that were a little bit lofty, but I think we've just got to keep talking about them, and using the opportunity like I did to kind of educate, people a little bit, going, oh, that's kind of a, because I'm not inventing anything new. Like, these are concepts that are floating around out in the world. Like, I mean, you can trace back, like the philosophies and stuff of ecological economics, like back into the 50s and 60s, right? Like it's always been there, but it's just trying to keep advancing the concept today.
Yeah.
Well, and even the, legislative targets for management of biodiversity and populations. And we've talked to Jesse Seaman about that a couple times too. So, and I'm sure you've talked to Jesse. So, and I think that's kind of where the focus of the article is really. I kind of chose the economics one because it just kind of tweaked my interest a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think the legislative goals, that seems more like a real, like a, something that can be done soon. Yeah.
It's, there's kind of like your, what are your short-term gains that you can get done, what's your mid, long-term, and then what's your, like, multi-generational kind of plan, right?
Yeah.
So I think the key thing is from a conservation perspective is tackling all of those areas like now.
Yeah.
So what are the short-term things we can do? Boom, do this. Just change this. That's a quick win. We know it's going to have some benefits. The amending legislation in the province so that we have objectives, measurable objectives for wildlife populations, fish populations, and their habitat. I mean, that's not a do overnight kind of thing. Like, I mean, you're most likely talking about a process that could take like years. Legislative changes can take years and years to actually finally pass and be enacted into law. So that's kind of more like your kind of like maybe midterm kind of stuff. We've got to get those moving. But what are the things we can start doing right now that wildlife are going to respond to? More habitat enhancement, dealing with road density. Those are short-term things that we know we can do right away and start to see some benefits. And then the stuff like the intergenerational, kind of things, and that those types of decisions, they have to be started now. Like if you go, well, this is going to be available for future generations in 100 years from now. Like you can't wait till 99 years to say, okay, now's the time to do this, right?
I feel like that's kind of what's troubling or has been, holding BC back is that abundance piece. So we've kind of had this silver lining of, we don't have to do anything until the last minute. Yeah. Now it's, steelhead or whatever the case. Yeah. It's like, well, it's almost too late.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So,
and it's interesting. I mean, it doesn't always have to be too late, but when you look at the history of Canada and even the United States, because we're fairly young, in the world stage as far as, modern times. I mean, First Nations people have been in North America, like, eons before the Europeans, arrived here and stuff. Like life was going on here in North America. But, in the big sense of when, the European influence started in North America, it's been 150 years, was literally just, there was the philosophy of never-ending natural resources. And that's how the Western development of North America proceeded. It was abundant. Timber was unlimited. Fish, salmon were unlimited. Wildlife, everything. And man, there's some stuff that just happened in the history of Canada and the U.S. Even just specifically to do with wildlife. Like in today's terms, I mean, it's absolutely shocking. Stuff that went on, like we almost, like well over 100 years ago, almost decimated muskox and caribou populations in the far north in Canada because of basically a major industry in Canada for meat market, like a commercial meat market. And we've gone through a period in the country where, we almost drove them to extinction once. And I think the problem that North America has in that conservation world and in the political world is we are still some ways living the legacy of this abundance of natural resources and the light of that is starting to show up rapidly and across the continent with a lot of different species and stuff like that. And so it's got everybody kind of then, reverting back to more conservative things and trying to get attention, to the caribou issue and the salmon issue. Whether or not we'll actually, pull out some of those species probably won't make it. And that happened historically as well. Some species were actually completely driven out. Others were brought back from, literally the verge of extinction. I mean, if you ever read about the history of pronghorn antelope in Canada, it was basically down to a private herd owned by a rancher, I think in southern Saskatchewan, of far fewer than 200 animals, which basically repopulated the prairie provinces of Alberta, right? So, I mean, we've kind of gone almost to the tarmac and pulled out, but, as much as what we think that, oh, we're more advanced, we're smarter, it's kind of like we're just repeating history. So
yeah, there's like a misconception that, as we move forward, we always get smarter, but that doesn't mean that, like, in some cases, a long, long time ago, maybe they were smarter in certain aspects. So there's kind of like a fallacy there.
Yeah, no, totally. But
yeah, no, it's
those are some pretty in-depth things.
Yeah.
Deep stuff, right? So, but we were kind of, I think it was just before we started recording. Like, I mean, I asked you guys, right? I said, do you kind of feel like, it's like, hey, we started into this hunting thing, 5 years ago, and it was like there's this sort of like all this exciting world that's opening up, and all this stuff, and then the metaphor I used was kind of like, you thought you were going off on this, this great kind of like personal part of your life and something that you do, and then the hunting fraternity kind of like said, welcome guys, and it's like, here's the obligation binder for conservation, right? Like you need to know about this. You need to talk to your MLAs. You need to, read some papers. You need to be able to articulate this and understand how these things work. And I was interested if you guys kind of felt like all of a sudden you go, whoa, we didn't know we were getting the cat when we bought the house kind of thing, right?
It's like you get a 400-pound backpack dropped on you as soon as you start get into it. And you have to slowly start making that load a little bit lighter and doing research and figuring stuff out, because it's to be honest, in the beginning and even now still, it's a bit overwhelming. One of the things we've been talking about over the last couple episodes, which is kind of what you were just talking about, is I think we're spread too thin in BC. There's a lot of issues happening right now.
Yep.
And, starting to talk about, again, what you were sort of just touching on is maybe we need to create a priority list for everybody and say, what's number one? Let's get everybody to go after this one issue, and then we'll work to the next one. Start with the ones that we can knock off a little bit quicker and be working on things in the background a little bit. But I feel like everybody's spread too far.
Yeah.
And it's good, everybody cares, but I think we'd have more of an impact as a group. And it doesn't just have to be hunters. It can be outdoor enthusiasts or anybody who cares about these issues to come and contact everybody they need to get these issues brought to the forefront and tackle them, because it's I don't know, it's a tough battle that we're all struggling with and trying to figure out how to do it. So it's
it's like that central leadership piece.
Yeah.
And kind of where is it coming from, and be the challenge. Yeah,
it's I can certainly appreciate, having that feeling, right? Like you're just kind of, and I think people coming into hunting very quickly can appreciate the need to step up and be involved in conservation outside of what you're taking, and if anything, there are people, if you're new into hunting, will even feel a greater responsibility to give back, because what you're actually taking is a life, right? Like you're not just going on a photographic trip or backpack. So that definitely probably should heighten the responsibility in most people. And I think it's very natural, even if you've got into hunting, later on. But yeah, that is a big challenge, not to overwhelm people or discourage people, and to find ways to get like the collective, group kind of, moving, like you said, kind of in the direction of priorities. And that is, that is a huge challenge, in the problem in the province, because so many people have their own ideas of what the priorities are, as well as their own ideas of how to fix them. And people spend more time and energy fighting for their perspective than they just actually do saying, you know what, it's better that we're all agree and pointed in the same direction, regardless of what the direction is. Like, as opposed to going like, no, this is more important in this part of the province, and so you're completely wrong, and I'm going to fight you on that because this is what and how we should be doing it.
Yeah.
We're still struggling, maturing as a hunting community that way.
Yeah.
Kind of getting over the listen to me, I'm right type thing. So that's a challenge, and I think that's one of the biggest things that new hunters can do is to be aware of that, but to be very open to learning the issues.
Yeah, 100%.
And I mean, I'm kind of written some previous articles about like what can you do, and one of the most critical things I think you can do in conservation as a hunter is simply educate yourself about what's going on. You don't have to expected to have an opinion. You don't necessarily have to go out there and go, well, I've got the strategy on how to change this. Simply knowing, the facts, what's real, and educating yourself, I think is huge.
Yeah, for sure.
If more people did that, even ones, like myself that have multi-generational hunters, if just more people spent a little bit of time objectively educating themselves about an issue, I think we would move ourselves along a lot quicker. So.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, along with that 400-pound backpack that you get when you start, you also find out that hunting's extremely hard.
Yeah.
Right? Like you don't realize it. I think it wasn't that long ago we were not hunting, and you think, oh, you just go out there with your rifle and you shoot something and then you bring it home. But I got skunked last year. It's my 5th year.
Yeah.
And I still remember every single one of those hunts.
Yeah.
Oh, totally.
Different reasons.
Totally.
But, it's hard.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
So the animals are better at it than you are, right? So you learn that.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, they live 24/7, right? Every millisecond of the day, they're basically
looking for predators.
Yeah. Very rarely do they ever let their guard down, but yeah, I think as we kind of touched on earlier about like what's your definition of success, and if it's not always about actually harvesting an animal, every year successful, right? And I've always kind of found when I've lightened up the self expectations that getting the animal is I've then actually tended to be more successful,
right?
And have a better time when I'm out there. And
you always come home with something. Oh, it's usually not an animal.
Yeah, totally. And it's one of the things I've actually started to do kind of as I got older a little bit is I've expanded my my hunting a lot more, especially into small game. And it's you look into places, like down in the US, and it's just sort of like, my God, you get into some of the eastern states and it's like, it's cottontails and gray squirrels. And it's just like the world revolves around that, right?
Yep. Dogs, they have dogs for them.
Yeah, the little beagle dogs and stuff that, can know if a squirrel's hiding in the tree, and, and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, hunting's hunting.
Yeah.
And you can get the same feelings and do all the same thing, but British Columbia definitely is, it's a culture, or if you're talking hunting, you're talking big game.
Right.
Right. And we're just so blessed by so much more.
Yeah.
And if you actually really start to look at like the opportunities and the length of seasons.
Yeah, you can almost hunt all year round.
Almost all year round. Like, I mean, there's places in the province where snowshoe hare like open up on the 1st of August.
Yeah, we can do that here in next week. So I'm already looking forward to that.
Yeah, and it's untapped.
Yeah. It's exciting too. Those
totally.
Hunts. Yeah. I feel like when I'm hunting small game, my heart is often beating faster than I'm, going after a big game animal, which is kind of interesting.
Cool.
Yeah. I don't know what it is about it, but
they're gone in a flash.
Yeah. I don't know. I think you mentally prepare yourself a bit more for that big game animal and being, ready for it and being calm when the opportunity comes up. And when it's small game, it's almost like boom, they're there. You've got 10 seconds to get a snowshoe hare before that thing takes off like a rocket.
Or a rough grouse that blows up beside you and scares the Jesus out of you. Like nobody's ever like, oh my God, there was like a bull moose standing right there beside me, right? And I never even noticed it. But a rough grouse will get you every time. But I think that's and I've got more into waterfowl hunting, which is, outside of the lower mainland, it's just not a big thing in British Columbia until you go to the prairies. And it's just like, I love it.
Something we want to do.
Like it's a whole different experience, right? Like you're learning the patterns of something that just operate completely different than an ungulate, they fly out, they feed, they come back, and, they do this and they react that way. And the sky is this, and they're flying at this elevation, and the calling and, and all that kind of stuff. It's completely different. It's cool in the sense that you can now, there's all this other gear, so like the decoy, all that kind of stuff, and blinds and, and all that kind of stuff. The thing I'm finding that's a little, kind of cool is big game hunting is always like, it's this endurance thing, right? Like you're hiking, you got a pack, you're in the mountains, it's a lot of work. If you get a big animal somewhere, you're going, oh my God, where duck and goose hunting, it's kind of like, you go out somewhere and you sit down, put a blind, and then it's like you sit in it and you're sitting there with your hunting partner or whatever, and the dog's sitting there, and you get your coffee out. But you can sit there and have a conversation like this. Like nobody's going, shh, the ducks might be on that hillside. They can hear you, like, shh, like you just, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, get ready. Here's a bunch coming, and then, you go into your mode. So I find it's more relaxing, then my focus on what's going on out there is completely different because I'm looking at waterfowl and birds flying by, and and you're in a different habitat types, and then all of a sudden there's like plovers and sandpipers, and one day last fall this big huge flock of trumpeter swans came by and landed in front of us. And I was like, oh my God, those things are big, right? I would just really encourage people to expand. It's just it's hunting, and it opens it up. And I finally, like in the last couple of years, said, I'm going to spend more time grouse hunting in the fall. And I'm just going to dedicate to grouse hunting. Right. And I am going to leave the rifle at home. Yeah. And if I'm the person who in the middle of the day, just a couple kilometers from home, which is where I can go, happen to be the guy that's going, there's a 6-point bull standing in the middle of this old trail. Yeah. And I got a 16 gauge shotgun. I'm just going to go, oh, well. Yeah. Right. For sure. I'm just going to let that go. Yeah. Where if you try to cover your bases, and you end up with nothing. Yeah. It's like you got to commit to like, I'm going to focus on one thing. And it's like, between, ducks and geese and snowshoe hare and some grouse and, and stuff last year. And it's all of a sudden going, hey, that's actually quite a bit of variety in the freezer, right? And so, and it's, I would encourage, more people if, especially people that are getting into hunting and, sort of is like start after the small game, right? Like, there's less people doing it. There's more opportunity to get things. All of the skills and trying to figure out wildlife and the whole all of that's coming into play. Yep. And don't discount the fact that, you get 8 or 10 or 12 grouse over the course of the fall. And it's like, it's actually quite a bit. Yeah, for sure. So
we've got 2 guys that just got their hunting licenses this year, and we're taking them out for snowshoe hare for the first
that's cool.
hunt. So that's going to be fun. And
that's cool.
Neat to observe them and watch it all kind of play out. So that'll be fun.
They're a blast.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But Mark, I feel like we could probably talk for 6 hours here. So the room's getting hotter by the minute too. There's no AC up here, so we can start to wrap things up here. We gave you a heads up that we like to end off with a hunting story, so you can leave us with that.
Well, a hunting story, sure. Yeah. So one of the things I'm finding as I get older, being, not that old to some people, but I'll be, I think, 52 this year. My whole philosophy and worldview of hunting and wildlife are starting to change a lot. And I've had experiences happen to me over my lifetime hunting where, something happened while you're out there and you were just, this just feels really weird how this thing unfolded. Like I'm kind of talking like there's a bigger purpose of something that's going on out there. Like there's more to wildlife and nature than just these biological units that are walking around out there. And I've started reading, because these questions and these feelings have come up in my life, and I've started buying a lot of books and reading about like indigenous cultures and their relationship to wildlife and like Inuit in the Arctic and like things that they believed and rituals that they had. And I've started to really start to tap into kind of a more spiritual component to hunting. Like there's some things that are going on out there, deeper meaning. And, one of the experiences I had kind of, I was probably just in my early 30s that took me a long time in my life to reflect back on, and opening this part of my life up in relationship to hunting wildlife. But it was later towards the end of November, and I was whitetail hunting just close to my home because I'm lucky and I can just literally just leave my house and go back out behind and be in great country. And I just hike. I just park the truck and you just do these big loops and walks and ridges and all this kind of stuff. And there's snow on the ground. The snow was falling. It's quiet. It's just prime time whitetail hunting. And I covered ground like lots of kilometers, right? And I couldn't even find a deer. Like not even the, oh, there goes some whitetails. And it's like, which happens 90% of the time there. You blow them out and you just see a whitetail or what, nothing, absolutely nothing. And I'm just like, my God, like what's going on here, right? And so getting towards, the middle of the afternoon, later in the day, I went to a different location and I started going in on this little old road, still hadn't really seen anything. And I just happened to look down in the thick trees in the bottom and I just saw a flicker. Just kind of, something flicker in the trees and I'm kind of like, okay. And so I got down and I kind of like waited and this nice, big, mature 5-point buck just nose to the ground, just stepped out of the trees onto this old road in front of me and I was ready and I got him. Just prior to that hunting season, like the winter before, my grandfather had passed away. And my grandfather and I were extremely close. I mean, we could sit and have these long conversations about it. It was the core of who he was, like about hunting and stuff. I probably spent most of my life, hunting with my grandfather and stuff. And when I got that deer, I was overwhelmed with a feeling that my grandfather was there with me. And I never felt it after that day. I never felt his presence when I was out in the woods. And later on, I've had other experiences which are starting to kind of get into the realm where I feel like that the animal is being guided to me, or I'm being told this is the animal you are meant to harvest. And that's why the situation is working out so perfectly.
Right.
Like, I don't know if you've ever had those experiences where like everything you're doing and it's not clicking. And then all of a sudden you're just like, this is picture perfect,
Yeah.
and it's this beautiful scene and everything is perfect.
Yeah.
So I'm starting to now be more open to the fact that that's because it's meant to be.
Right.
And when I've opened up this spiritual aspect of my hunting relationship out there, I've reflected a lot back on that experience with that deer and that feeling of my grandfather. And, I think I toyed this idea around in my brain going, I think this is what actually happened that day, but I was never really able to like admit to myself that I think this is what actually happened. But what I actually believed happened that day is because of my grandfather's connection was so deep for so long in his life to do with wildlife and hunting. When he passed on, he showed up to me in the form of that deer. And when he brought himself to me, partly because that was the only animal I got that fall. It was the only meat that I put in the freezer. And it was the only living thing I saw all that day was that one buck, which is pretty strange in the Kootenays, not to see any white-tailed deer.
Yeah.
But what I actually come to believe in my heart today is that experience was witnessing my grandfather going on.
Yeah. It's a great story.
And once I kind of really felt in my heart, that's because that happened like 25, 30 years ago, that I now really see the animal world, my hunting, and what happens with the animals that I take like completely different.
Right.
And I feel there's much more meaning and purpose, like purpose behind what and when I do something that's just beyond a hunter getting a biological unit and canceling a tag. Right?
Yeah.
Like it was you can probably hear it in my voice a little bit, but it's a pretty emotional thing for me to, kind of talk about and stuff.
Yeah.
But it's one of the most profound and powerful things that have ever happened to me hunting.
I can share a very similar story. And we've talked about this in earlier episodes, and it's kind of the seed of why Kelly and I are hunting today. But it was 2013, my dad passed away from a heart attack.
Okay.
And I was at the hospital when it happened. And there was some nagging feeling to get out and go for a hike. There was a hiking trail right behind the hospital. So I said, okay, I'm just going to leave. Going to go up there and just kind of get away on my own for a little bit.
Yeah.
And I found this rock to sit on. It was kind of a wet, cloudy, gray, shitty day. And decided to sit down there for a minute. And this sounds like complete bullshit, something that would happen in a movie. But the clouds parted, the sun came out, and all of a sudden there was 3 deer right off to my right.
Yeah.
And it was kind of right at that moment when the seed was planted to hunt and connect with the outdoors. I started to think about my dad's connection because he spent most of his life fishing and hunting, and that was everything to him. And right at that moment too, I sort of just accepted the fact that my dad had passed away, and I felt like I was healed from that point on.
Yeah.
Actually, it takes a long time to heal from something like that, but I kind of carry that with me every time I'm in the outdoors. So I 100% agree with you that there's something there for sure, and it really impacts the way I approach hunting, and that's why I struggle with things like this moose hunt that we're doing, because there's a certain vision and an expectation I have to experience it. So there's definitely things going on out there. So
That's cool. That's it's powerful, right?
It is,
And the interesting thing is, like I said, I've started, because these questions have started coming up in my mind, and so I've just started reading more and the Western view of wildlife, like I said, these biological units that, we can study with science and kind of predict their behavior and that sort of stuff. It is not what a lot of other cultures believe and their relationship to wildlife and what they are and what they represent and how they're brought to them and this sort of stuff. And I do see a lot of parallels to some of the things that I've always done, I've always believed and I've always felt, and rituals that I've had now are being reaffirmed, going, oh, isn't that very interesting that, Inuit people did this, because it's very similar to what I did. I never knew why, but what that's starting to kind of, one, is showing me that there's the potential for this bigger universe out there. But there's also like a different thing about being a hunter in society that transcends time, transcends cultures, regions of the world, where there's some kind of a conduit between the person that goes into the mind of a hunter and what's happening in the rest of the world. That's pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
Yep. Powerful, deep. We thought we were getting deep before.
Yeah, no, that one's that one's really deep. So and I think the big message is if everybody out there, to find a little piece of that true, deeper meaning inside their heart for what they believe in and what they're gaining, and explaining what and why things mean to what they're doing out there. I think hunting will be better off for that.
Yeah.
And the true nature of what hunters are, who hunters are, will become more obvious, as opposed to people, doing things for the extrinsic kind of, values or whatever. And if you can really tap into those personal inner meanings and just live your life by it, regardless of what's going on around you and stuff, then I think you'll really find a meaningful place in hunting, whether you've been doing it your whole life or just starting out. But just really be open to what your heart's telling you.
For sure. That's why we do it.
Yeah.
It's out there for everybody, so go after it. Mark, anything links-wise you want to share, your website, social media stuff?
Yeah, I mean, if anybody wants to read any of the articles that I've written, it's just hunterconservationist.ca.
Perfect.
And I just kind of post more sort of longer, in-depth articles and stuff. They're not every day. There's not something every week or whatever. It's kind of, because they're a little longer, but there's a good one on there, I think, just from around the new year that some of the new hunters might want to read. And it was kind of like things that hunters could do, in 2018, kind of like positive things. And I just kind of gave a list of things about if people feel like, hey, what can I do to get involved in conservation? I think that's a really good article to go in and kind of like going, I think I could do this, and then feel like you're contributing. So
awesome. Well, I think we'll call this part 1. We'll have you back sometime.
Awesome.
Thanks a lot for coming.
Yeah,
I
thanks
for coming.
Really appreciate the invite.
This episode of Rookie Hunter was also brought to you by North Arm Knives. North Arm Knives are handcrafted and sold directly through a father and son team right here in British Columbia. Choose from a selection of outdoor knives, kitchen knives, and custom engravings from northarmknives.com. They ship internationally and guarantee all of their work. Kelly and I have put their products to the ultimate test and give them our stamp of approval. Head over to northarmknives.com.